Edward Darling.
Delighted to be here as part of the celebrations, although I'm a little concerned to find out that I finished 30 minutes ago. Anyway, I've been very privileged over the years. I've had similar experiences in the early 90s with these massive bird declines that were highlighted by the British Trust for Ornithology and the breeding bird surveys. And over the years, we've been exploring ways of resolving these issues, and I've had the privilege to meet many of the splendid people that have spoken here already this evening. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to take you through 9 minutes of purgatory just for 1 minute of joy at the end. The purgatory is because it's all based on how we're actually going to resolve these systems. And the reason why I'm sharing this today with you is we're talking about the sustainable life indicators, which is, everybody talks about these issues of wildlife is important, but nobody's ever explained why. And we were listening to, there was a big 3-day symposium in Cambridge with all the global conservation organizations discussing why we had to rebrand the messages, why we hadn't got things right over the last 40 years, and why we needed to do things differently. Nobody's ever explained that the natural world is amazing. It produces clean air, produces clean water, and it produces an abundance of food, all of which we as human beings need. And the problem is that we've got separated from that, and that the wildlife in the natural world gives the indicator of how the world is going to support us. And that repossession of interest is so important and why people need to engage. So what we've been able to do is we were aware of these huge declines that the BTO had recognized, the relentless declines of a whole range of habitat species. Sorry, I've lost the indicator down there. And something needed to be done rather than just talking about it. Over the 20 years between 1970 and 1990, once we'd known there was a problem, since 1990, we've spent over £20 billion over the next 20 years. And the wildlife, the bird numbers, specialist species, have declined by 50%. Up to that time, we spent £20 billion and we still lost another 50%. And so if we allow that to happen for the next 20 years, as everybody else has suggested, there's going to be extinction on our watch. So the United Nations, we've got these wonderful sustainable development goals, which are well lauded, but don't actually make any sense to anybody. So we reorganized them. Don't worry about what's on there, but what you've got on one side is the features that affect land and the features that affect the quality of human life. And that these are the things that really matter in life. So on top of that, because the world's a complicated place, we started with a small issue of ecology, but we encountered quite a lot of problems with some of the schools in our area, and we found that our local schools had got some of the highest levels of self-harming in the area, and over 30% of the children were self-harming themselves, cutting themselves to pieces on a regular basis. We also had a referendum which suggested that things were changing, and that we've had a number of elections around the Western world that haven't gone quite as people had anticipated. So the world's a complicated place, and we've created this thing called the life map, and that's the ability to take this very complicated information that's beyond the grasp of all of us, and to be able to present information at national level, at county level, and at community level. And it's using the same system that the ecologists have used for years, of these 10K grid squares, but being able to put people in them. And so we've got the life map that's able to present information. And what we've been able to do, we've gone back to the British Trust for Ornithology, and there are 2,854 communities around the UK. And what we've been able to do is to give each of these communities an ecological value and a ranking system. So people can understand ecological values that they have around them. We're able to present that at county information, at county level, and so you've got certain communities that have got top 1% in the UK, top 10%, above 50%, or below average. And then ultimately, when you get to your community, these are the species that this particular grid square community in Hampshire where we've been working, and there are 69 species that that community has the responsibility for. And it's that personal responsibility rather than the fact that there's just these huge global national problems that are beyond the scope of all of us. And that by making people responsible for the resources within their communities, and the linkage between how we represent ourselves, the wildlife, and then the food that we produce, the water that we take, and the understanding by putting it in the life map that all of these things fit on the same ledger for the first time, and that if you keep putting more people in there, then you keep getting less of these other things that will sustain us in the long term. And it's that personal responsibility that we've been trying to work with. We've also got a system of habitats across the UK, and the State of Nature report covers 6 broad habitats, and the bird records cover farmland, water and wetland, woodland, and also some of the coastal areas. And we've been able to reprogram some of the government information systems, and so slowly they're starting to link. And so we've got a system that allocates all the parishes across the country. We've got habitat maps that are able to show where the different types of habitat are. We've got the species indicators, not just the farmland ones, but for all of the species habitats. And we've been able to give an indication of where these species exist. And then with people registering an interest in land and how it's managed, we're able to provide them with information about the species that they are responsible for, pictures, because quite a lot of experts discussing things at the bar know an awful lot until you actually ask them what these things look like, and it comes as a complete shock. And some of the discussions we've had is that if we can get to the stage where people acknowledge that there are declines of birds and that they don't want anything to do with the solution, that is a huge change from people just ignoring the fact that it even exists. So there's the ability to provide information, and we've worked with the BTO through all the breeding bird survey material, and we've been able to give people an understanding by using a common method of survey, so that all of the different philosophies and interests in the countryside and throughout society can calibrate performance, and we've got these different thresholds. Bear with me, it will all make sense in a moment. So we're able to give that, and when people use this standard methodology of the breeding bird survey, you can able to identify a kilometre on the land within your community, or whether it's the land that people manage, and you're able to count in a consistent way, and you're able to then benchmark that information. Very tedious, it's all boring, but what we're able to do is we're able to provide that information for all of those communities across the UK. We're able to put it into a format that schools are then able to access so that the kids learn what's around them, photographs of what's there. We've got a registration of interest, and we expect somewhere in the region of 10% of the UK's land area to be registered in this. And there's a range of surveys being undertaken. 3,000 surveys are undertaken for the breeding bird survey, and we expect around 1,500 counts to be undertaken as part of this Life on Land project that we'll be launching early next year. Now, that's all been great, but the reason it also deals with ecology, but as I said, the interrelationships, and we've been talking with government and the chief scientists to see if we can get this embedded in the next generation of support and how we manage the countryside. And the idea that public goods and public products, but how we actually deliver the things that we need in society. So it fits all of the different things together, and the reason why we've been sharing this with you is that right at the very start of this idea of how we could actually convey information and help people change and improve things in the future, is that we were looking for people that were willing to test this system. And the Countryside Restoration Trust listened to what we were doing and the idea of being able to provide this standard language that would calibrate performance. And Robin very kindly registered the whole range of the CRT land in this process to test it. And it was, everybody believes what they're doing is good, but the problem is that unless things are done in a particular way, then it's very easy for it to be dismissed anecdotally, or the fact that it's just rewarded because it's just what people want to hear, or turning to internal audiences. So the Countryside Restoration Trust registered the land, and with the surveys, we're able to provide these first non-subjective assessments, and we were able to present the first time Tim got one very similar to this, with top 1% for range of species on the farm at Cambridge. There were a number of species that were in the top 10% and top 1% of densities across the national benchmarks. This system's been endorsed by the top science organizations, it's been endorsed by government, and we're in discussions with the United Nations to make sure that it ties in and we get their endorsement too. So it's a fantastic system, and Tim was feeling really great about what this first formal assessment, saying what you're doing in the trust is amazing. Robin had been at another meeting, and he came in for 2 minutes very briefly, and Tim was delighted to show him the certificate, to which Robin promptly turned around and said, so what aren't we doing very well with? Which is just typical. Tim, I think, would have asked that a moment later. But it really does give a really good idea. And when we did the first set of results, one of the people who'd been in the audience had been hugely skeptical about the whole system. And he came up to somebody else that we know and said, right at the end, he said, do you know, I wasn't sure about this. But halfway through, the guy sitting next to me turned around and said, I want one of those certificates next year. So that was great. Not only is it able to do that, but we're also, for all the red-listed species, we're also able to present these Life on Land awards for the top densities. And this is taking the survey work that the BTO do with the 3,000 odd surveys that they have undertaken, and we're able to put these threshold points, and that for certain species, you'll get a particular, for each species, there's a particular number, and that once you exceed that, then we're in a position to award these Life on Land awards. And these introduce to society for the first time the concept of success and solution. And we've been very privileged with the range of people that we've worked with, quite a number of them have been mentioned here today, to be able to present these awards. And the counts that were undertaken in 2016, in the very first year that we did, we were able to present Tim Scott with the National Award for the highest densities of yellowhammers that year. So that was fantastic. 2017, Vince Lee did a lot of the surveys there again, and we were able to present Tim once again with one of these national awards, but for this time for the highest density of grey partridges against the whole of the UK benchmark. And so this is for the first time, not CRT saying what they're doing is good, or that it's performing things that are better than others, is that there is a national standard, and this is showing that the CRT is delivering what it sets out to do. And as my final point, is that I'd also like to say that once again, when we launch this whole scheme on the 29th of January next year, which is 2 months before the official Brexit date, we'll be launching the system that's giving this framework and some stability at a time of change rather than chaos, possibly would be a kinder word to use, is that there are systems of identifying what works and what works at the very highest level, and that we'll be presenting 6 awards for 6 species for the highest density of that have been achieved across the UK. And one of those recipients was featured in one of the slides. One of your trustees will be receiving one of those awards as well, and Tim Scott will be once again receiving one of the national awards for species. So CRT, many congratulations to you. Thank you for believing and testing our system, and that in 5 years' time, when you hope to meet again, is that we hope that there will be many of the other farms that are slowly testing this system that will also be receiving these awards, and there will be many other people following your example, and there will be these beacons in society of success and solution. So thank you and congratulations, and I very much look forward to the next 5 years.